would you advise a successful athlete on their way to a very lucrative professional career? What do they need to be thinking about now before they even move on to that level?
Just be very slow and methodical. It took you a lot of late nights to get to the position you're sitting. A lot of practice that nobody saw, a lot of broken bones. None of these financial decisions need to be made quickly.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see athletes make when they first come into wealth?
One, and this is a very common thing, is buying too much house early on. House and other assets that carry high carrying costs. The second side I see is a little bit more on the tax side. Athletes, the first thing they want to do is buy assets for family members that really help them where they got to. For athletes, this income is volatile. You could go from having a contract and being the star on your team to either being waived or have no contract the next year or next day.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.
Welcome to episode 8 of On Pointe, the Element Pointe podcast. Carlos, 8 episodes.
The grand finale.
We did it.
With our own K-Mart as a special guest.
Yes. Well, grand finale of season 1.
Of season 1.
Yeah.
Season 1.
True. Yes. Our own Kristopher Martin was our guest today. So we had the privilege of sitting down with Kristopher Martin, who's the Senior Vice President and Wealth Advisor here at Element Pointe in his 9th year with the firm, almost since the very beginning.
Since the very beginning.
And over those years, Kris has been instrumental in, among other things, building a successful sports-focused practice here at Element Pointe, working with professional athletes. And there's some incredibly unique aspects of that business that we had the chance to explore today with Kris. Obviously, we've worked with Kris for a long time and knew a lot of these things about working with athletes. But even I learned new information today.
Yeah,
about
I always
nuances.
do. And I think our listeners will really learn some valuable insights into, the nuances of working with professional athletes. And Kris has some really great advice to share.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, we hope you enjoy episode 8 of the On Pointe podcast, our conversation with Kristopher Martin. Here we are with our very own Kristopher Martin. Kris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on a topic I'm very passionate about, so I'm excited to share some insights with our audience.
Great. Well, for those listening, we also call Kris K-Mart, so if you hear me say that, that's not by accident.
I also get the title of the coolest person at the firm.
You do generally.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, you do. But let's talk about why that is before we go into what we're really here to talk about today, which is working with professional athletes and why that can be different in many ways than working with business owners, for example. Let's talk about the origin of why you're the coolest person at this firm, which really stems from your career in the entertainment industry before becoming a financial advisor.
Sure. So today I'm a Senior Vice President and Wealth Advisor at the firm. I have the privilege of working with the families that we advise on a daily basis, including professional athletes, on how to demystify their balance sheets and really be a sounding board for them to navigate their financial lives. I never expected to be a financial advisor. I'm born and raised here in Miami, which I'm very proud of. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, but even though I graduated with a finance degree, my plan was always to work in the music industry. So I minored in music business, and during my time in college, I spent every waking hour figuring out how to make that dream a reality. So interning, working at music studios, applying to record labels, living in New York during the summer, anything I could get my hands on, I did it. And when I graduated, I think I did everything you'd expect to get ready to go to New York or LA. And my trajectory had a little different turn of events. My now wife and high school sweetheart got a job in Miami and said, "What are we doing?" And so I started looking for jobs in Miami. I'm not a Spanish speaker, so the Latin music market wasn't an avenue for me. But I did get a call from Live Nation, the global concert promoter. And that's where I started my career. I was hired as a booking manager on the theaters and club side of their business. So I got to book concerts for a living. really anything around 5,000 capacity and under. So a lot of theaters and clubs. So got to work with a lot of upstart talent to seasoned talent that wanted to do smaller venues for any particular reason. So that was really my first foray into the music industry. Really taught me a lot, but also taught me a lot about how people can get taken advantage of in those positions, and then led me to my pivot into the financial industry.
Yeah, and part of why you're the coolest person at Element Pointe is because for the first 5 years or so that you were with us, anytime anybody needed tickets to anything, you had the hookup.
But I still have some connections.
I don't know. I think they might have faded now.
I didn't burn any bridges, thankfully, like some other folks I know. But
so let's talk about that pivot. You mentioned that you saw the way that certain artists, entertainers, celebrities in general could be taken advantage of, and why that inspired you in a way to go into wealth management and being an advisor. Tell us a little bit more about what you saw and how you feel like you can make an impact today or have made an impact on the clients that you serve.
So I can give you a real life example. I mean, I think a lot of professional athletes, celebrities, entertainers, they have a big team around them. There's a lot of moving parts, and that can lead to a lot of leakage, right? Whether it's payroll or just a lot of people's hands in the pot, making different decisions that are out of the core principle, which is really unique to that landscape, right? There's not a lot of checks and balances unless the principal's really advocating for that, the celebrity, the athlete. And something that I'm a big proponent of is just self-advocacy and really understanding who has authority or power of attorney on moving your money. And so that was the first thing I really was interested in financial management, is who's making these decisions. And it really was sparked from, I had the opportunity to pay a lot of the artists at the end of the night, at the end of the show, before they went on to the next tour stop. And a lot of times I found myself speaking with tour managers or friends or whoever were in the position at the time of management that didn't really understand deal structure or understand what they were supposed to get, how much cash they should be handling. And that really triggered intrigue in me in terms of, if these people are who they're surrounded with, imagine how successful they could be around people that really know what they're doing. And so I started to really look around. I think, like a lot of folks, I thought the only people that managed money were big banks and brokerage firms, until I was lucky enough to be introduced to the two of you, and really start to learn about the independent landscape, separating who holds your money versus who manages your money. So a big starting point when we meet with professional athletes, at least at our firm, is talking about the landscape of wealth management and the duty of care that different advisors have depending on their registration or the firm that they're with.
Yeah, and I should qualify also that there was an interesting pivot in your career, right? Because I think when you began in this industry in wealth management and with our firm, coming from Live Nation, I think the thought that you had is, perhaps you'd be working with a lot of artists and entertainers. And then really, like Carlos and myself, a lot of your initial relationships were with business owners. And from there, actually, there were some opportunities in sports that came up. And the funny thing is just the career arc, right? I mean, on the one hand, the athletes with whom you work today face a lot of the same challenges that some of the artists and entertainers face, but it's also very different in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so it's just a great sort of example of how, what you initially might set out to do sort of changes over time into something else, but there's nonetheless a lot of similarities that carry over from what your initial thought was as well.
Absolutely. And I'll be celebrating my 9-year anniversary next year. And sports and professional athletes has changed a lot. Contract sizes over that time period have almost tripled. I think when I started, starting quarterbacks were making about $20 million a year. Now they're making 60 on average. That's a huge change, not only for the individual earning it, but for the advisor pool around them. Right. And so a lot of conversations that we have with professional athletes is really about who's qualified for that amount of wealth. Right. And the differentiations between an entrepreneur and those, they're pretty similar, but a lot of unique differentiators. So one is the condensed earning period. That $60 million a year is coming between the ages of, call it 22 and 32.
Increasingly coming at a younger age now as well,
exactly.
which brings in a host of other challenges.
Which brings in another host of educational challenges, and so what we try to mitigate for is how do we plan for such a long lifespan when career earnings are this, condensed? And that's very different than an entrepreneur in the sense of where they might work their whole life and then have a sudden liquidity event. So the liquidity event is the same paradigm, but the time frame is a lot different. Yeah. Also for athletes, this income is volatile. You could go from having a contract and being the star on your team to either being waived or have no contract the next year or next day. And a lot of their destiny is not in their control. A lot of times when we talk to athletes, they're like, I'm going to work. People forget they're W-2 employees of these teams. Yeah. So that is a hard thing to plan for, especially in today's environment, like sports, like the NFL that still don't have fully guaranteed contracts. So we have a lot of conversations early on how do we plan around what's guaranteed, and how do we, basically make that last with prudent decisions early in your career.
Kris, David mentioned there's a lot of parallels and similarities between, working at Live Nation with artists and entertainers and now transitioning to an advisor who, amongst others, works with professional athletes. But how did you develop a specific expertise in working with professional athletes? Well, tell us some of the things you did to get really knowledgeable about advising those types of clients.
Yeah. So, part of it was naturally, I thought that's the type of advisor I was going to be. I didn't ever think I would work with business owners. I thought I came from the music industry, and so that means I'm going to have entertainer clients and maybe, start moving into a similar industry, being professional athletes. So that was always the goal, until I realized that a lot now, looking back, it was more advice of that, being provided to athletes that couldn't actually be clients because of bad decisions. And so the pool that you have to actually have as viable clients is smaller because of either bad advice or bad decision making. So a lot of what I did early on in my career was try to understand the psyche of athletes. As we mentioned, there's a lot of people around them. From the time somebody realizes they have talent, there's people that want something from them. Whether it's their parents who want the best for them and get them on travel teams and everything they want, coaches that start recruiting them, and then you got financial advisors, you got insurance advisors, you got CPAs, and then you got teams, right, trying to get into a draft. So for me, it was also trying to be like really understanding where they're coming from and understanding them off of the field or off of the court. I think some of the greatest advisors are that sounding board for everything that isn't necessarily particularly sports. And so I've really tried to dive into the challenges that they might face, whether it's, a short career being ended early. How do you psychologically advise somebody through that? And that's really understanding what means most to them. And a lot of times when you sit down with the athlete, the sport that they play is the last thing they want to talk about. I think that's one of the most fascinating things that I've learned in my career is just there's so many more passions than what define them and what people see in their public life. And I think as advisors and, as a lot of advisors try to get athletes as clients and get in that money grab in that game, a lot of that is lost. So I've tried to be more of a sounding board and advocate than a financial advisor, if that makes sense.
And Kris, you've had the opportunity to work both with business owners that tend to skew a bit older, yeah, and then athletes, as you mentioned, who tend to skew younger. Clearly, there's a big difference in investment time horizon, yeah, and how they have to position themselves. But what are some of the other differences that you've noticed between, and perhaps largely driven by age, right? Yeah. That you've seen between the business owners that you've worked with and then the athletes?
So I think one of the most common things is just how public their lives are. From the second they sign that contract, you know exactly how much they're going to make on what. There's whole websites now dedicated to just tracking these contracts. And a lot of times with a business owner, you really won't see that unless it's a Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. You really won't see it until a transaction happens. So battling that is really difficult. And that becomes, I think, as an advisor, being able to do a lot of the blocking and tackling for the people that want to come into their lives is really important.
So the idea that there's essentially almost no privacy.
There's no privacy. Yeah. And that's a challenge from a lot of aspects, whether they just want to take a nice vacation, but you're helping them remember, don't post on social media till you're back home, or, hey, your passwords really need to stay your passwords. So we have a lot of conversations around how to protect privacy, given how public their lives are, and how to be smart about the decision making. So that's a really key part of it. But then there's a lot of similarities, right? I mean, I think the liquidity event, really having a need for qualified advisors around them, is very similar. And also lifestyle creep. We talk about this a lot about entrepreneurs having a first time liquidity event, just how much spending is sustainable, right? Not trying to keep up with your friends that might already have a private plane. And so really helping coach athletes around that. It sounds like a lot when you're making it, and it is a tremendous amount of money, but what does the back half of that look like? And having those conversations early, even as uncomfortable they are, is extremely important.
Yeah. And for those that there are probably many different listeners who are listening to this. Some of them are, maybe aspiring advisors who want to work with athletes someday. Some may be professional athletes themselves. Some may be those that have futures as professional athletes. What would you advise a successful, let's start with the athlete side. What would you advise a successful athlete on their way to a professional career, and a potentially very lucrative professional career? What do they need to be thinking about now before they even move on to that level?
Yeah. So there's two items I would touch on. The first being the team you have on the field is just as important as the team you have off the field. I think not enough time goes into due diligencing the team. And a lot of times we run into this term a lot in the professional sports industry is business manager. There's somebody that's in control of everything. And I think that's a terrible model. I really think you need to focus on building expertise in every vertical: the financial advisor, the tax professional, the estate planning attorney, insurance and risk. Whenever that's bundled together, we see a lot of the horror stories. And business manager, that's an unregulated term, right? It's very easy to say you're a businessman. And a lot of times it's hard to decipher, is that person credentialized? Do they have certificates? So even if we're sitting down with a professional athlete for the first time on the verge of a really big contract, I encourage them to speak with other advisors, learn the differences. So when you hear what I'm saying, it's not just marketing. It's not just lip service. The second item is just be very slow and methodical. It took you a lot of late nights to get to the position you're sitting in, a lot of practice that nobody saw, a lot of broken bones. None of these financial decisions need to be made quickly. And I think that's a stigma of the industry. It's like, you need to get a financial advisor. You need to have life insurance. And that's how a lot of advisors pitch. It's a need you need to have versus saying you should interview just like anybody else would. Get references. Don't just get professional athlete references that work with them. Cause you're going to be in a category of, ultra high net worth individuals. And there's a whole population of people that can give you advice and serve as references. So those are kind of the key terms I really am a proponent for. It's be really methodical about the team that you build around you, really knowing what each of them does for you. And then secondly, there's nothing wrong with being slow. I think a lot of athletes get FOMO and that's how they're pitched to. But the reality is the slow approach, I think, is really, I've seen the most success and longevity of careers with athletes that take that approach.
Yeah, I think we've seen the slow it down advice is really great advice just for everyone. I mean, athletes and business owners as well. How many times have we seen somebody, sell a company and it's like they have to immediately deploy capital and they have to find the tax, savings, and they end up making bad investment decisions because they're in such a rush to like make the next step without slowing down. The most successful ones we've seen have taken their time, done their diligence, thought through what they want to do next, thought through the team that they want to have around them, and then made decisions after careful and thoughtful analysis.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the biggest mistakes I've seen is they can get in these rooms for a long time because of their fame. But now they're getting in these rooms because of their balance sheet. They're viable investors. They're viable board members. And so a lot of times what we see mistakes is just maybe loading up on illiquid investments too quick because they just get access to all these things without understanding the dynamics, when you actually get liquidity back or how long your liquidity can be locked up. And it all sounds great. These venture capital deals are sexy. They're exciting. But they come with a lot of other risks that I don't think is adequately explained when you're, call it in your 20s. And so that's definitely a great point in terms of just because you can get in the room doesn't mean you have to be deploying capital in every single deal or every single person that comes across.
Oh, yeah. There's this Richard Branson quote that I always think about where he says, deals are like city buses. There's always another one around the corner.
Oh, yeah.
I've always thought about that because, you're presented with these opportunities, and this is so true, especially for young athletes. And the instinct is to go, if I miss this, I've missed this great opportunity. Yep. But the reality is there are so many of those opportunities that you'll see over the course of a career that, you have to really play the long game and think about it.
There'll always be another deal. Yeah. Always another investment.
So, other than, not really taking their time building the right team or maybe even rushing to make some of these rash sort of investment decisions, what are some of the other common mistakes that you see athletes make when they first come into wealth?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One, and this is a very common thing, is buying too much house early on. I think house and other assets that carry high carrying costs. That's number one. It's really talking to them about being patient, even maybe renting in some cities, because you could be in a new city the next day.
Right. I always think about that, especially today. Athletes get traded or free agency. And so if you're constantly buying too much house, you're going to end up just commissions alone are going to eat up a lot of capital.
And as we know in Florida, carrying costs have gone through the roof, insurance alone. So now you have this asset in one state that you're not even getting to enjoy. So that's a conversation we have a lot around, you can afford the house, right? And you can probably afford it for a long point in time. But as you start stacking these assets that have these carrying costs, all of a sudden your fixed expenditures really go up, and that becomes a quick drain, especially if there's a career-ending injury or, your career's cut a lot short. The second side I see is a little bit more on the tax side. Athletes have the first thing they want to do is buy assets for family members that really help them where they got to. And in the United States, you can't just gift as much as you want to an individual. And so a lot of times we have conversations about what it means if you want to buy $1 million house for a family member, what it means if you want to buy a car, how that affects your balance sheet. And as we just talked about with the contract sizes and the balance sheets growing, more and more athletes are having estate tax exemption issues. And in terms of how to plan and do estate planning for athletes. So we really hone on that early on in terms of, who do you want to take care of and how do we take care of them in the most tax efficient manner? And also being very prudent about how you publicize that. Sometimes I see marketing managers being like, you bought a house, let's get PR for it, right? Or you bought a car, let's put it on Instagram for who you bought a car for. We're just giving the IRS a timestamp. So we really try to be methodical about how to help people and then the right way to do it within the tax code. But we're not tax advisors, so we are careful about that as well. But it's just something that I like to bring up that I've seen a big gap in planning. And so those are two. And then also on the philanthropy side, I think making sure that they have the right vehicle set up for them. I think most athletes are philanthropically inclined.
Yeah, we certainly see that with our athletes. Absolutely.
And making sure that everything is in compliance. One of the common vehicles we see as a public foundation, where athletes are able to not only kind of get the foundation started with their own capital, but also be able to advocate their communities and people in their professional network to donate to it. But one pitfall that I see is that, they become the main donor of that public foundation. And if you get above a third if you're less than a third of public contributions to your public foundation, you can risk the rule of the IRS converting it to a private foundation. So just knowing what they're getting into on the onset in terms of what vehicle makes sense for giving, we usually do a lot of education around that and laying out all the options. And sometimes it's a combination of a few different vehicles.
And even beyond the financial aspect of philanthropic vehicles, I think to your point earlier about having the right team, I think philanthropy is part of that as well, right? Because you can't just create a public not-for-profit, for example, and then expect that it's going to, run itself, or that you'll be aware of all of the various nuanced regulations that you have to follow in order to operate that. And so I think part of that team, especially for anyone, for athletes, but really anyone who's philanthropically inclined and wants to create, whether it be a private or public foundation, there's got to be a knowledgeable team of people there to help to administer and operate that entity.
Yeah, and I think, along with that, there's been a whole subset of advisors that have really started making a name for themselves in just philanthropic advice, right? How do you hire an executive director that's good at fundraising? How do you vet them? What how do you make sure that your registration is done on time every year? And so going back to the team, it really takes a multitude of professionals to make sure that's a well-oiled machine, right? Making sure the tax return is filed on time, making sure that you're tracking all these donations that you make, whether it's via your credit cards or via wires, making sure that there's one person really seeing all of that is super important.
Yeah. And you alluded to, obviously, the fact that a lot of athletes make the majority of their earnings at a fairly young age. And certainly that's true of their earnings from sports. There's been a number of athletes, and it's an increasingly growing number, who've really made a successful pivot into the business world post career. I was fortunate to attend a conference recently, actually, and the keynote was a discussion actually between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. And Magic Johnson obviously was one of the more successful post career entrepreneurs, in that he's had businesses in a variety of sectors. I think it seems to me like he and others have paved the way for some of the younger athletes to think to themselves, there's a business career here for me as the business person beyond my playing days and my sports career. From your seat, working with a lot of these athletes, how are they already thinking about the next chapter?
I think that's a huge trend. I think you're seeing, as I touched on it earlier, working for the team versus being the owner of the team, right? Ownership is a huge theme and conversation that I have with professional athletes a lot. How do we become the entrepreneur? How do we own these assets? How do we be the decision maker, right? A lot of their career, they're the student, being coached. And so we talk a lot about what's important to them and then how to achieve these things. Real estate has been a big topic. How do we build a portfolio of that? But where we always come back to is management, right? And an investment is only good as its manager. So whether it's franchises, real estate, making sure that there's qualified people in those positions, because time is really limited as a professional athlete. I think people underestimate how little time they have and how many meetings they're in. One thing I've had to learn as an advisor is the schedule. Right. And when it's time to be able to focus on things that we're doing on the planning side versus when they're in meetings till 11 o'clock at night and then on the plane the next day to a game. So I think it's really important to build that management team. And quite frankly, I don't think necessarily advisors in our seat are the best people for that either. So I tell athletes, it's really thinking about what's important to you now, but that post-career, we can start kind of laying the breadcrumbs when you have more time. You really need the time to be into these investments, whether it's a franchise. You wouldn't go into a business that you wouldn't eat at yourself, or you wouldn't you need to be able to have some sort of control and time to oversee these. So I think that is a very common theme to your point in ownership and how they get there. A lot of the conversations I'm having is, let's slow down. Let's think about what that business plan might look like today, but maybe not making those investments until later on, or doing it at a much smaller scale while you're playing. Right? Let's dabble in something. Let's maybe talk to some other people that are doing it, be an investor in a franchise, be an investor in a real estate partnership, see what the tax situations are, making sure that your team is qualified to help you through these processes. So I think the overarching theme is, yes, ownership is definitely on the horizon for a lot of athletes, especially given, the balance sheets they're having. But the advice I give is start small. And then when you have more time, you can dive in with both feet.
Smart.
So, Kris, pro athletes are often targeted with high risk or even, sometimes, unfortunately, fraudulent investment schemes. So what are some of the due diligence steps that you help them think through, or that we do for them to help obviously avoid investing in these types of deals? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think, the first starting point is just speaking with the manager or the person soliciting the deal, right? I think in our business this year alone, we've had close to 400 manager meetings. So we're really familiar with that due diligence process. For me, it's I want to know who's bringing this deal to you. Did it come through the agent? Did it come through another financial advisory firm? Who did it come from? A fellow athlete? So really getting down to the bottom of that's the first step. And typically we'll have an initial due diligence call without the client. With that manager. So we can really get a presentation as if they pitched it to the client. And then on the back end of that, I'm looking for references. Does anybody else know this person? What have they done before? We don't go as far as background checks, but as much as we can find on the internet, we want to find out about. Mm-hmm. And so I think references is really important in this is really finding out is this a larger fund? Is it a smaller fund? Is it a direct investment in a business? And then sometimes it's balancing, is this a family member, right? I think that's also a really tricky part of our job. Like, is this an investment that we're making to support somebody, or is this an investment for a return? And you have to be really mindful of that because it can blend very easily. So typically we're going through the list of due diligence questions. Who are you using for, do you have audited financials? How are you doing your reporting on a quarterly basis? What law firm are you doing? Do you have subscription documents, or is this a handshake deal, right? And the wire instructions are going to individual LLC. So we really want to check all those things, one, before a penny leaves the account, but if it's even viable. And that goes back to my comment about being slow, right? A lot of times when you see these deals, we're looking for a quick close, right? Yeah. And we want a limited amount of investors. And then what I've been talking with a lot of professional athletes about is not just the money part of it, but your name, image, and likeness. I think a lot of managers love to show the professional athletes that are investing in their deals. They're very quick to put them in the decks, and they're very quick to mention their names. One, I feel like athletes should be compensated for that, right? Whether that's better deal terms, equity versus them putting up cash. And I think managers are sometimes a little reluctant to that, but I'm very cognizant of that for athletes because I've gotten emails saying such and such is investing. Right. I think, and they know this person, right? They know this player, and they're friends. And so we really want to, really flush that out, at the front end of the deal, before, anything really goes out the door.
Another thing that we've done, and I think is important to do with the athlete clients with whom we work, is we've made them a part of that process so they can understand what diligencing an investment opportunity looks like. Yeah. I think to many people, and this isn't just true of athletes, I think it's true of a lot of business people as well, diligencing often means reviewing a deck and having a conversation. But I think when we show them the next level of what that looks like, the types of questions that are being asked, the type of documentation that, we ask managers to provide, and then the type of follow-up and other questions that are asked, I think it's a really important educational process for these athletes, because it just gives them not just a decision on an investment, but a framework by which to evaluate the types of opportunities that they will be presented with over the course of their careers and their lifetimes. Yeah. And I think that giving them that framework helps them down the road distinguish between real opportunities that they should be genuinely considering and evaluating versus opportunities that they can very quickly dismiss or discard. Yeah. And I think that, to me, what I've seen, and I think you've done an excellent job of this over the years, Kris, is incorporating them into that process so that they can evaluate things independently. Obviously they're always welcome to seek our advice, but I think that they feel empowered over time to be equipped with the skills needed to take a look at and discern between what they should be spending their time on and perhaps not.
Yeah. And understanding deal structure. I think, sometimes just the type of deal becomes really attractive versus, hey, where are you in the waterfall? If this company doesn't work out, what's your liquidity preference, right? Where do you sit in the capital structure? So having those conversations are really important as well. And I think through sharing like due diligence questionnaires with professional athlete clients helps them think about those things other than, what's the deal? How much are you looking for? And, maybe a little bit about the economics, right? A lot of that in the conversations that I found in these deals is sometimes it gets glossed over. And it's more about the type of deal and why it's a good fit for you versus some of those other nuanced questions that we've asked. And it brings it back to a lot more of our process, really figuring out where these sort of deals fit in the balance sheet. Sometimes when we meet a professional athlete, they've never actually seen their net worth statement ever. And they might have worked with other advisors previous to us or were the first advisor they've ever met. I think that's ground zero for athletes, really understanding what they own, how they own it, and where these different either deals or assets fit into that balance sheet is the framework and foundation to all things to follow, right? And so I'm a huge proponent of really building that out on the front end. And I think it's really empowering when they can also see the growth of that balance sheet in real time, right? Hey, 3 years ago, this was the balance sheet we shared with you. these are the milestones we hit. These are the things that maybe we didn't do so great. And it's a great report card, I think, especially as some of the first conversations they're having around, financial education and literacy. So that's really rewarding.
I mean, couldn't agree more on the balance sheet planning. I think also, the cash flow planning we've seen is hugely important. I mean, you mentioned earlier about how a lot of times you see this headline number on a contract, but the reality is the mechanics of that contract as far as how that is paid and whether some of it is guaranteed or not, is an entirely different thing. And so cash flow comes often in intervals or installments over different periods of time. And, we've seen scenarios where a lot of times illiquid investments are made, where commitments are made to fund private equity, for example, where maybe that doesn't align very well with the timing of the cash flows. And so can we talk a little bit about just how cash flow planning is hugely important in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, it varies by sport, but, looking at, for instance, like the NFL, there can be a lot of components to the contract, mainly trying to figure out what's the guaranteed portion of the contract versus the non-guarantee and where those certain triggers hit. So one of the first things that we'll do, and I think it's something that I advocate for professional athletes to do when they interview advisors, is, do you understand my contract? It's one of the first things I ask for. Send me your contract. Before I ask for investment statements, if they have investments, I really want to see that contract because it really lays out, when they're going to get paid and when the triggers are. So we know exactly what's guaranteed that we can plan for today, or guaranteed at signing, as usually it'll be written in the contract, versus you need to be on the team by this date for then this threshold. So It helps us as investment managers to plan a portfolio management strategy. But more than anything, it helps them really dive into that. I think some agents are really good at going through that with clients, but I think some agents are really bad. And so for me to be a secondary resource for them to really be able to plan that out, and we'll put it on a calendar and really show them, like, and if they convert your salary to a signing bonus, you're going to get paid a lump sum this date versus it all coming in your weekly check. And then also showing what comes in net of tax, right? The contract is a gross number. So we do a lot of projections in terms of what's the net number that we can expect, depending on what's guaranteed versus what's not. Also starting to talk about estimated payments. I think one of the pitfalls that we didn't touch on earlier is that as you start building this liquidity, from your contract, and then also make income that does not have withholding from taxes from the marketing side of things, estimated tax payments to come into the picture and understanding that cash flow. Also, agents bill at different times. So talking about cash flow, on a $60 million contract, 1%, that's a lot of money each year. So when do they bill? Do they bill you quarterly? Do they bill one lump sum? So those are all the things on the front end that we're intaking in our process and entering into our CRM to make sure that each athlete is being monitored for those needs. And every contract's different and every athlete's different. So you really have to take a really hands-on, customized approach when it comes to cash flow planning.
Kris, as you look to build your practice, your advisory practice of working with professional athletes, talk to me about your client selection process, because you're not just going to work with any professional athlete. So, what are some of the questions or things that you talk to them about before making the decision? And obviously it's a two-way decision, but whether we're the right fit.
Yeah. So some of it is the dynamics of our firm. We typically work with a smaller group of clients with larger balance sheets. That's always been our business model. And I think it allows us to spend that quality time that clients deserve versus some of the competitors that we go up against. So the first thing is just finding out, one, are they qualified from a financial standpoint to meet the criteria that we have for clients? Because we don't want to dilute service because we're taking on too many clients, whether it's a professional athlete or not, right? So that's step one. And then secondarily is a lot of our athlete businesses come through centers of influence that are friends or even clients of the firm. I've been really lucky to make really good friendships with successful agents and service providers to athletes that really serve as a great kind of first step. They know the person really early on. My approach was never to be the advisor at the rookie days or the combines. It just wasn't my trajectory to get into sports. More than anything, we've built a reputation of being that kind of specialty advisor. And when an athlete's ready for an advisor like us, they usually come through us through one of those referral channels. And that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. I think all athletes, just like every individual, has a lot of aspirations, a lot of goals. But we work with a very specific niche sort of clientele. I think the contract sizes are allowing more and more athletes to fit into that bucket. So for me, it's a two-way street. It's one, getting to know them on a personal level, and then also using the referral sources we've built as kind of that first layer of, are they ready for an advisor at our level? And a lot of times I'm just a resource, right? I've spoken with a ton of college athletes that might have some endorsements coming in, but they are expecting to go to the draft. And a lot of times my advice surprises them. I said, you don't need a financial advisor right away. I know it feels like you do, right? You need somebody telling you what to do with your money, but a lot of times I say get a great CPA, make sure that your taxes are filed on time every year. And if you can start saving money consistently, that you can part with it for an investment portfolio or, something outside of what you're making for cash flow, just start the first few months doing what you need to do on the field or on the court. I think there's this tremendous pressure that they already face to be successful in a professional sport. And then also the pressure that they need all these people around them. And then the key word being you need it. So that goes back to, and I'm going to mention this a lot, about just slowing the process down, right? Really getting those key people in place early on. And then for us, we kind of meet clients when they're just about to apex and need a level of advice that's just not kind of common knowledge.
And as you've worked with professional athletes for some time now, and I've seen the tremendous impact that you've had on their lives and their career in many ways. What's the most rewarding part of that job?
Yeah, that's a big question. Some of it is seeing how they talk about me as an advisor to other people that's important to them. And it's never, how much return they made or the last investment we made. It's Kris was there when either something really good happened or something really bad happened. Right. So that is always really rewarding. And then seeing them hit those milestones when we met that first day and we had that checklist of things that they wanted to do, whether it's, become a leader for their franchise or, build a business outside or raise X amount of dollars. It's priceless to see that get checked off the list. And I think that just really revolves not just for professional athletes, but just being a financial advisor in general, right? We get a lot of trust placed in us. And if you can really help a family, a client, a professional athlete navigate those waters in good and bad times, I think you're really fulfilling your duty that you set out and promised to them early on. So that's been the coolest part of my job, besides, getting to see them do cool things on TV. But the awards, the accolades are always great. But I think some of the smaller things and the achievements that they made, whether, starting, a lot of our athletes we've watched since they had their first kid, so it's really cool to see their families grow, they grow, especially when you meet somebody in their 20s and, you're with them for several years. It's a really unique experience.
Kris, what advice would you give to a young advisor who wants to work with professional athletes in their practice?
That's a really good question. Transparency. I think a lot of young advisors want to have these sexy, high-profile clients, and these clients can suss that out very quickly. I think being your organic self and being relatable is going to define your success working with athletes. There's trust issues in general, just given some of the, backgrounds that they come from or just the amount of people that are around them. So when they look for financial advice, it's really somebody that you're the first call. And I think in the beginning, and I saw that a lot at Live Nation, was like, why is this person in the room with them? Why are they in the dressing room? And why is this person outside the dressing room, right? How do you get on the inner circle? And I think in traditional sales training, it's like you want to say all the right things and you want to talk about all the clients you work with and talk your book that we talk a lot about with the young advisors, but all of that is not organic. I think you really have to develop a personal relationship before you can develop a financial relationship. And trust is paramount, even more so than a lot of other kind of successful entrepreneurs that might have worked with advisors for a long time. They know that. And so I would say really working on being able to create organic relationships from the onset. and not trying to chase it, right? I think there's a lot of organizations that developed around, being advisors. I think now there's like credentials with like some of these leagues that you can get as like a trusted advisor or whatever it might be. And a lot of those things you have to pay for, right? So just because you pay for, whatever it is, doesn't make you a great advisor. Just because you're on the list doesn't mean you're a great advisor. So for me, it starts with the relationship, and then, the financial advice will just kind of happen naturally.
Yeah. And I know one thing that you and I have talked about, especially as it pertains to young advisors, is that you have to truly develop the knowledge as well. Yeah. It's not enough to, be a friend and be fun to hang out with. Yeah. You're there to really impart knowledge, and you have to have that deep knowledge of financial topics, whether it be investments or accounting or tax or insurance or whatever it may be. Although, in our business, we may not be their attorney or their tax preparer. Having an in-depth knowledge of those subjects is crucially important. And I think, certainly we've talked about this. A lot of the young people that we encounter, they're thinking first about the cool factor, and secondarily about the knowledge that they actually need.
How do I get in the pictures, and how do I, stack my Instagram? But yeah. I think that's a great point. I think, the greatest advisors I've seen and the mentors that I've looked up to, they know a little bit about a lot of things. I think in our field, we never know the questions we're going to get. And, when you have a 28-year-old professional athlete, there's all sorts of things that are going to come up in their life, good or bad. How do we pay this, or who do we talk to about this? And you're the call. So you need to be ready for that. You need to be knowledgeable on those topics. Some of it I pull from my personal life, right? Being a first-time homeowner and what they might go through, versus some is just, my CFP background and estate planning. But there's really unique challenges when it comes to professional athletes and the timings of those things. So, you're the coach. You're their coach off the field. And so, I think that's a great point. And, I think knowledge is extremely important for young advisors to make sure they're spending time, obviously networking and making, appropriate connections, but really spending the time, diving into the material, being updated with current events, and knowing the topics that might affect, and changes that might affect professional athletes particularly.
Great.
So we talked earlier about the trend of contracts getting bigger in professional sports. There's also college athletes now being paid, not just from colleges themselves, but also name, image, and likeness. Are there any other trends in sports right now that, you're paying particular attention to, or that you think are really important?
I think an area that is getting some attention, but probably not enough, is that, the investment in female sports is real. There's a lot of true investment. We're starting to see, not quite in the top 10 highest paid athletes, but, highest athletes in the world. We're seeing more female names on that list, which is huge. That's something that I don't think anybody ever predicted until we had people really break out and knock down some walls. So that's really cool to see. And I expect that to grow. I don't think anybody's going to say they're happy where it's at in terms of, there's only a handful that you can name as the highest, and there's kind of a big drop off after that. But I think the tide is changing, and I think it's a true priority for owners. We're seeing more and more team owners. We work with a few professional team owners focused on female sports leagues and how do they get exposure to those leagues. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we're seeing it, just on the investment side, I see a lot of the more sports dedicated firms. That's definitely one of the pillars of what they're looking to invest in and allocate dollars to. So,
and with each of us having 3 daughters and you having a daughter as well, Kris, I think that's a great thing all around.
Yeah, it's monumental, right? I mean, you're starting to see, if you can get the dollars, everything else will follow. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges for a long time. But I'm really seeing that trajectory. I'm seeing it from, male professional athletes wanting to invest in female sports, or, getting more deals that revolve around that. So I think the more support and the more light that can be shed in that area, I think it's going to be really exciting over the next several, call it next decade.
Agreed. Well, Kris, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Telling us about.
Thank you for having me. I know we spend a lot of time together. But
we did.
This was fun.
It's a different setting than usual.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Like I mentioned, this is a topic I'm very passionate about, and I think we're very passionate about as a firm. And we maintain and stay focused on building a great network of professional athletes that we can help.
Great. Well, thank you, Kris. And like your clients, we appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great conversation, Kris.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions.